The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the city when Margaret Chen opened her eyes. She was 87 years old and every bone in her body ached from sleeping on the hard concrete. Next to her, curled up in a thin blanket, was little Lily. The child was only 4 years old with dark hair that fell across her face as she slept. Margaret watched her granddaughter breathe slowly, in and out, and felt her heart break all over again. Margaret's hands were stiff and cold. She rubbed them together slowly, trying to warm them up. These hands had once done such beautiful things. They had played piano for over 70 years. They had taught hundreds of students how to make music. Now these same hands were rough and dirty, with cuts on the knuckles from trying to open a dumpster lid the night before. She looked around at their small space on the sidewalk. They had a spot next to the big shopping mall, under a small overhang that kept some of the rain off them. There were 3 bags with all their belongings. One bag had their clothes. Another had some food that Margaret had managed to collect. The third had Lily's things, a few toys that Margaret refused to throw away, some books, and a small stuffed rabbit that was missing one ear. People walked past them every day. Most did not look. Some looked but then turned their eyes away quickly, as if being homeless was something they might catch. A few people were kind. They would drop coins into the old coffee cup that Margaret kept near the edge of their blanket. Some would bring food or bottles of water. Margaret was always grateful, even though it hurt her pride to take charity. She had not always been homeless. Margaret remembered her life before, and sometimes the memories hurt more than the cold concrete beneath her. She had owned a beautiful house once. It was not a big house, but it was filled with music and light. There was a piano in the living room, a baby grand piano that her husband had bought for her on their 20th wedding anniversary. That piano had been her most precious possession. For 50 years, Margaret had taught piano lessons in that house. Children would come after school, sitting on the bench beside her, learning to read music and move their fingers across the keys. She was a good teacher, patient and kind. Some of her students became quite talented. She had received letters from them over the years telling her how she had changed their lives, how she had given them the gift of music. Her husband, Robert, had been her partner in everything. He had worked as an accountant, a quiet man who loved numbers the way Margaret loved music. In the evenings, he would sit in his chair and listen to her play. Sometimes he would close his eyes and smile, and Margaret knew that the music made him happy. They had one daughter together, a girl named Grace. Grace had been a sweet child, but life had not been kind to her. Everything started to fall apart when Robert got sick. He had cancer, the kind that spreads fast and does not let go. The medical bills started to pile up. Even with insurance, there were so many costs. Treatments, medicines, hospital stays that lasted for weeks. Margaret used their savings first. Then she took out a loan against the house. Robert fought hard for 2 years, but in the end, the cancer won. He died on a Tuesday morning in November, with Margaret holding his hand. After Robert died, Margaret was lost. The house felt too big and too quiet without him. She tried to keep teaching, but her heart was not in it anymore. Her fingers would shake when she played. Students started to leave, finding other teachers who were younger and more energetic. The money from lessons became less and less. Then there were the loans. Margaret had borrowed money to pay for Robert's care, and now the companies wanted their money back. She tried to pay, but it was too much. The interest kept growing, getting bigger every month like a monster that could not be fed. She got letters in red envelopes, then phone calls that came at all hours. Men in suits came to her door, talking about foreclosure and legal action. Margaret did not understand all the papers they made her sign. She was old and tired and still grieving for Robert. She trusted people who should not have been trusted. They took advantage of her confusion, her sadness, her age. Before she knew what was happening, the house was gone. The bank took it, and with it, her piano. Everything she had built in 50 years of work disappeared in a few months. She had nowhere to go. Grace, her daughter, was supposed to help. But Grace had her own problems. She had started using drugs years before, something that broke Margaret's heart every day. Grace had a daughter, little Lily, but she could not take care of her. Some days Grace would disappear for weeks, chasing the next high, forgetting that she had a child who needed her. Margaret tried to take care of both of them. She moved into a small apartment with Grace and Lily, using the little money she had left from selling her furniture. But Grace kept stealing from her, taking money to buy drugs. Bills went unpaid. Then one day, about 6 months ago, Grace left and did not come back. She just walked out the door one morning and vanished like smoke. Margaret was left alone with Lily. She tried to keep the apartment, but without money it was impossible. The landlord gave them 30 days to leave. Margaret looked for help, but there was nowhere to go. Shelters were full or had rules that made it hard for an old woman and a small child to stay together. She had no other family, no one she could ask for help. Pride kept her from begging her old students for money. She did not want them to see how far she had fallen. So they ended up on the street. It happened so gradually that Margaret almost did not notice. First, they stayed one night outside because they had nowhere to sleep. Then 2 nights. Then a week. Then it became their life. An 87-year-old woman and a 4-year-old child, living on the sidewalk with 3 bags of belongings. The hardest part was not the cold or the hunger. The hardest part was keeping Lily safe and trying to make her life feel normal, when nothing about their situation was normal. Margaret woke up every morning determined to protect this little girl, to keep her from harm, to help her believe that the world was still a good place even though it had been so cruel to them. She looked down at Lily now, still sleeping peacefully. The child's face was dirty even though Margaret tried to keep her clean. There was a public bathroom in the park 2 blocks away, and every morning Margaret would take Lily there to wash her face and hands. She would wet paper towels and do her best to make Lily presentable. Other homeless people had warned her that social services might take Lily away if they saw a child living on the streets. This fear lived in Margaret's heart every single day. She would die before she let anyone take Lily from her. Lily began to stir. Her eyes opened slowly, and when she saw her grandmother looking at her, she smiled. It was a beautiful smile, innocent and full of trust. That smile gave Margaret the strength to face another day. "Good morning, sweet girl," Margaret said softly, her voice rough from the cold night air. "Good morning, Grandma," Lily whispered. "Is it time for breakfast?" Margaret's heart squeezed. She had half a sandwich saved from yesterday and an apple that someone had given them. It was not much, but it would have to do. "Yes, my love. Let's eat and then we will go to the park." They ate slowly, making the small amount of food last. Lily chattered away as she ate, telling Margaret about a dream she had about flying birds and chocolate ice cream. Margaret listened and smiled even though her own stomach was empty. She had given most of the food to Lily. She was old, she told herself. She did not need much. But the truth was that she was always hungry, always tired, always cold. After breakfast, they packed up their things and walked to the park. It was safer to move around during the day. Staying in one place too long made people notice them, and Margaret did not want attention. The park had benches where they could sit, and there was a water fountain where they could drink. Margaret had made it her mission to teach Lily, even though they had no school, no books except the few in their bag, no proper place to learn. She would draw letters in the dirt with a stick, teaching Lily the alphabet. She would collect bottle caps and use them to teach counting and simple math. She would tell stories, making up tales about brave princesses and kind animals, anything to keep Lily's mind active and hopeful. "Can you tell me about the piano again?" Lily asked as they sat on a bench. This was her favorite story, one she asked for almost every day. Margaret smiled, though it hurt to remember. "The piano was big and black and shiny," she began. "When you touched the keys, it made the most beautiful sounds. Music would fill the whole room like magic. I taught children how to play, how to make their own magic with their fingers." "What did it sound like?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. Margaret hummed a melody, one of the simple pieces she used to teach beginners. Lily listened carefully, trying to remember the notes. Then the child hummed along, getting some of it right, making Margaret's eyes fill with tears. "You have music in you," Margaret told her granddaughter. "Just like me. One day when things are better, I will teach you to play." "Promise?" Lily asked. "I promise," Margaret said, even though she had no idea how she could ever keep that promise. The day passed slowly, as most days did. They sat in the park. They walked around the neighborhood. Margaret looked for cans and bottles that she could return for a few cents. Every penny mattered. In the afternoon, they went back to their spot by the mall. Margaret laid out their blanket and sat down, putting out the coffee cup for donations. People walked by, busy with their shopping and their lives. Some dropped coins into the cup. One woman stopped and gave them a bag with sandwiches and juice boxes. Margaret thanked her with tears in her eyes. These small acts of kindness kept them alive. As evening came, the air grew colder. Margaret wrapped Lily in both blankets, holding the child close to keep her warm. She sang quietly, old songs that her own mother had sung to her when she was young. Lily fell asleep in her arms, safe and warm despite everything. Margaret looked up at the darkening sky. She wondered how her life had come to this. She had worked hard, been a good wife, tried to be a good mother and grandmother. She had given the gift of music to hundreds of children. And now she was here, homeless and forgotten, with nothing but 3 bags and a sleeping child. But she was not broken, not yet. As long as Lily needed her, Margaret would keep going. She would find food. She would keep them safe. She would teach and protect and love this little girl with everything she had left. Tomorrow would come and they would face it together. That was all she could do. That was all anyone could do. The night settled around them, cold and dark. Margaret held Lily closer and closed her eyes, praying for strength, praying for hope, praying that somehow, someday, things would get better. She did not know that change was coming. She did not know that their lives were about to be transformed in ways she could never imagine. All she knew was that she had to survive one more night, wake up one more morning and keep fighting for the little girl who trusted her with everything. And so she did. The rain started early that Tuesday morning, coming down in cold sheets that soaked through everything. Margaret woke up to find water dripping from the overhang above them, splashing onto their blanket. Lily was shivering beside her, her lips turning slightly blue from the cold. Margaret's heart jumped with fear. She had to get Lily somewhere warm and dry right now. She gathered their bags quickly, wrapping the wet blanket around Lily's shoulders. "Come on, sweet girl. We need to find shelter." Her old legs protested as she stood up, stiff from the cold and damp, but she ignored the pain. Lily's safety was all that mattered. They walked through the rain, moving as fast as Margaret's old body would allow. Lily held onto her grandmother's hand tightly, her small shoes splashing through puddles. The child did not complain, even though Margaret could see she was cold and miserable. That broke Margaret's heart more than anything. A 4-year-old should be crying and fussing, not walking silently through the rain with the patience of someone much older. Margaret remembered seeing a community center a few blocks away. She had never gone inside before, too proud to ask for help, too worried that someone might call social services if they saw a homeless child. But now she had no choice. Lily needed warmth. Pride did not matter when your granddaughter was shivering in the rain. The community center was a simple brick building with a green door. Margaret pushed it open and warm air rushed out to meet them. The relief was immediate. They stepped inside, dripping water onto the tile floor. A woman at the front desk looked up, her expression changing from surprise to concern when she saw them. "Oh my goodness, you're soaked through," the woman said. She was middle-aged with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her name tag said Linda. She came around the desk quickly. Come in. Let me get you some towels." Margaret wanted to refuse, to say they were fine, but Lily sneezed twice and the words died in her throat. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We just need to wait until the rain stops." Linda brought them thick towels and led them to a corner of the main room where there were some chairs. "You sit right here and get warm. Can I get you some hot chocolate? We just made a fresh pot for the morning program." Lily's eyes lit up at the mention of hot chocolate. Margaret nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Kindness from strangers always made her emotional these days. While Linda went to get drinks, Margaret looked around the community center. It was a large room with high ceilings. There were people scattered about, some reading newspapers, others talking in small groups. Children's artwork covered one wall. In the far corner, almost hidden behind a folding table, Margaret saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. A piano. It was an old upright piano, not fancy or expensive looking. The wood was scratched and dusty, and Margaret could tell from where she sat that it probably had not been tuned in years. But it was a piano. A real piano. She had not seen one up close in 3 years, not since they took her baby Grand away with the house. Linda came back with 2 cups of hot chocolate. Lily took hers with both hands, warming her small fingers on the cup. "Thank you," the child whispered politely, just as Margaret had taught her. "You're very welcome, sweetheart," Linda said warmly. She looked at Margaret. "You two can stay as long as you need. The rain is supposed to last most of the day." Margaret nodded, unable to take her eyes off the piano in the corner. Linda noticed where she was looking. That old thing has been here forever, Linda said. Nobody plays it anymore. It's pretty out of tune. We keep meaning to get rid of it, but nobody has gotten around to it yet. She paused, studying Margaret's face. Do you play? I used to, Margaret said softly. A long time ago. Well, feel free to try it if you want. It might be nice to hear some music in here again. After Linda walked away, Margaret and Lily sat quietly, drinking their hot chocolate. The warmth of the drink spread through Margaret's body, easing some of the ache in her bones. She watched Lily's color return to normal, the blue tinge leaving her lips. That was all that mattered, but her eyes kept returning to the piano. Her fingers twitched slightly, remembering the feel of keys beneath them. She had not played in so long. She wondered if she even could anymore. Her hands were so stiff now, so rough from living on the streets. Would they still remember how to make music? Lily finished her hot chocolate and looked up at her grandmother. Grandma, is that a piano? Yes, sweet girl. That's a piano. Like the one you told me about? The one you used to play? Similar, yes. But mine was bigger and prettier. Lily slipped off her chair and took Margaret's hand. Can you play it for me, please? You always tell me stories about the piano, but I never heard you play. Margaret's heart clenched. Lily was right. The child had heard countless stories about music, about the joy of playing, about the beauty of a well-played piece. But she had never actually heard her grandmother play. What kind of music teacher had Margaret been? To let 3 years pass without her own granddaughter hearing a single note from her. I don't know if I can anymore, Margaret said honestly. My hands are old and stiff. Please try, Lily begged. Just one song. A small one. Margaret looked around the room. No one seemed to be paying attention to them. The rain continued to pour outside, showing no signs of stopping. They had nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. And Lily was looking at her with such hope in her eyes. All right, Margaret said finally. Just one song. They walked over to the piano together, Lily's hand still clutched in Margaret's. Up close, the piano looked even more neglected. There were water rings on the top where someone had set drinks. The keys were yellowed and dusty. Some of the ivory was chipped, but it was still a piano, still capable of making music. Margaret pulled out the bench and sat down slowly. Her body ached as she settled onto the hard wood. Lily climbed up beside her, watching with wide, eager eyes. Margaret lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. They felt foreign and familiar at the same time, like meeting an old friend after many years apart. She pressed down gently on middle C. The note rang out, slightly flat, but still recognizable. Then she played a simple scale, her fingers moving up and down the keys. Some notes were more out of tune than others, but the basic sound was there. The piano was old and tired, much like herself, but it still had music in it. What are you going to play? Lily whispered. Margaret thought for a moment. What piece could her old hands still manage? Something not too complicated, not too fast. Something beautiful but simple. An image came to her mind. A memory of teaching that piece to countless students over the years. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was one of the most beautiful pieces ever written, in her opinion. Slow and emotional, full of heart. Perfect for old stiff fingers, you'll see, Margaret told Lily. Just listen. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes filled the air, soft and gentle. Margaret's fingers moved across the keys, remembering patterns they had played thousands of times before. The piano was out of tune. Her hands were not as nimble as they once were, but the music was still there. It still lived inside her, waiting all these years to come out again. The melody flowed like water, rising and falling, telling a story without words. It spoke of beauty and sadness, of love and loss, of memories that lived forever in the heart. Margaret closed her eyes and let the music carry her away. She was not in a rundown community center anymore. She was back in her house, her beautiful house, with Robert in his chair listening. She was young again, strong again, whole again. Lily sat perfectly still beside her, barely breathing. The child had never heard anything like this before. She watched her grandmother's fingers dance across the keys, creating sounds that made her chest feel funny, that made her want to cry even though she did not know why. Around the room, people began to notice. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Newspapers were lowered. Everyone turned to look at the old woman and the small child at the forgotten piano in the corner. The music was not perfect. The piano was out of tune, and Margaret's hands stumbled occasionally, missing notes or playing them softer than intended. But there was something in the playing that went beyond technical perfection. There was soul, there was pain, there was decades of love poured into every note. Linda stood by her desk with tears running down her face. She had worked at this community center for 15 years and had never heard that piano played like this. An old man in the corner pulled out his handkerchief and wiped his eyes. A mother with 2 young children stopped trying to get them to behave and just listened, her own eyes growing moist. Margaret played on, unaware of her audience. She was lost in the music, in the memories, in the pure joy of feeling the keys beneath her fingers again. This was who she was. Not a homeless woman sleeping on concrete. Not a failure who had lost everything. She was Margaret Chen, piano teacher, musician, artist. The streets could take her home, her possessions, her dignity, but they could not take this. They could not take the music that lived inside her soul. The piece built to its emotional climax, the melody soaring even through the imperfect piano. Then it softened again, becoming gentle and quiet, like a lullaby. The final notes hung in, the air fading slowly, reluctantly, as if they did not want to leave. Margaret played the last chord and lifted her hands from the keys. For a moment there was complete silence in the community center. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in. Soon the entire room was applauding, the sound echoing off the walls. Margaret opened her eyes, startled. She had forgotten where she was, forgotten that other people were around. She looked at all the faces staring at her, and her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She was dirty and homeless, wearing clothes that had not been washed in weeks, and all these people were looking at her. "That was beautiful," Linda said, walking over with tears still on her face. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." "My grandma is the best piano player in the whole world," Lily announced proudly, making several people laugh through their tears. A man with a phone in his hand approached them. He was younger, maybe in his 30s, wearing a business suit. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I hope you don't mind, but I recorded a little bit of that on my phone. That was incredible. Would it be okay if I shared it? My wife teaches music and she would love to hear this." Margaret felt panic rise in her chest. She did not want to be recorded, did not want people to see her like this. "I would rather you didn't," she said quietly. The man looked disappointed but nodded respectfully. "I understand. But truly that was remarkable. You have a real gift." Other people came over, telling Margaret how moved they were, how beautiful the music was. An elderly woman pressed a $20 bill into Margaret's hand. "Please take it," she insisted when Margaret tried to refuse. That music was worth far more than $20. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She clutched the money, knowing it would buy food for Lily. Pride did not matter. Her granddaughter's empty stomach mattered. Linda brought them more hot chocolate and some cookies from the staff room. "You're welcome here anytime," she told Margaret. "Both of you. We have programs for children during the day if your granddaughter wants to play with other kids, and you could come sit, stay warm, maybe play the piano again." "Thank you," Margaret whispered. "You're very kind." As they sat drinking their second cup of hot chocolate, Lily cuddled close to her grandmother. "Can you teach me to play like that?" the child asked. Margaret looked down at her granddaughter's eager face. How could she teach piano when they had no piano, no home, no stability? But then she looked at the old upright in the corner, still there, still waiting. Maybe she could bring Lily here sometimes. Maybe Linda would let them use the piano. It was not a perfect solution, but it was something. It was a beginning. "Yes," Margaret said, making another promise she hoped she could keep. "I'll teach you. We'll start with simple things, just a few notes at a time." Lily's face lit up with joy, and Margaret felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Just a small spark of it. Fragile and delicate, but there nonetheless. The music had reminded her of who she was, what she could still do. She was not just a homeless old woman. She was a musician, a teacher, someone who could create beauty in a broken world. The rain continued outside, but inside the community center, Margaret and Lily sat warm and safe. The piano stood in the corner, no longer forgotten, no longer silent, and though Margaret did not know it yet, the music she had played that day was about to change everything. That man with the phone had recorded anyway, unable to resist capturing such beauty. And in the age of the internet, beauty shared has a way of spreading far beyond anyone's imagination. But for now, Margaret just held Lily close and felt grateful for hot chocolate, kind strangers, and the reminder that music, like hope, can never truly be taken away. Margaret did not sleep well that night. She and Lily were back on their usual spot by the mall, huddled under their thin blankets, but Margaret's mind kept returning to the community center, to the piano, to the feeling of music flowing through her fingers again. It had awakened something in her that she thought had died. She felt more alive than she had in 3 years, and that scared her almost as much as it comforted her. The next morning started like any other. They went to the park bathroom to wash up. They ate the last of the bread that the kind woman at the community center had given them. They walked to their usual spots, looking for bottles and cans to recycle. Margaret was thinking about going back to the community center later, maybe asking Linda if Lily could play with the other children while Margaret rested somewhere warm. Around noon, as they sat on their blanket by the mall, Linda herself came hurrying down the sidewalk. Margaret recognized her immediately and felt worried.
Had they done something wrong yesterday?
Were they in trouble for using the piano? "Margaret," Linda called out, slightly out of breath. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Margaret stood up slowly, protective instinct making her pull Lily close. "Is something wrong?" "Wrong? No, nothing's wrong." Linda pulled out her phone, her hands shaking slightly. "Something amazing has happened. You need to see this." She turned the phone screen toward Margaret. It showed a video, and Margaret's heart sank when she recognized herself sitting at the piano with Lily beside her. That man had recorded them after all, despite what she had said. "I know you said you didn't want to be filmed," Linda said quickly, seeing Margaret's expression. "And I'm sorry, but please just look. Look at what's happened." Margaret looked at the screen. The video was short, maybe 30 seconds of her playing Chopin's Nocturne. But below it, there were numbers that Margaret did not understand. "What does this mean?" she asked, pointing at the screen. "It means 2 million people have watched this video," Linda said, her voice full of excitement. 2 million! Since yesterday afternoon, this has been shared all over the internet. People are calling it the most beautiful thing they've ever seen. Margaret felt dizzy. 2 million people? That could not be right. She was nobody, just an old homeless woman. Why would anyone care? "Look at the comments," Linda insisted, scrolling down. "Just read some of these." Margaret's eyes scanned the small text on the screen. This brought me to tears. The beauty and dignity in her face while she plays. How can we help them? This is what real music sounds like. That little girl watching her grandmother. I can't stop crying. The comments went on and on, hundreds of them, thousands of them. "I don't understand," Margaret whispered. "Why do so many people care?" "Because what you did was beautiful," Linda said gently. "Because you reminded people that beauty exists even in hard times. Because the love between you and your granddaughter shines through that video. People are moved by it, Margaret. Really moved." Over the next few hours, Margaret began to understand just how much her life was about to change. Linda had brought a newspaper, and there on the local news page was a story about the video. "Mystery homeless pianist touches hearts across the nation," the headline read. The article talked about the video going viral, about people trying to find out who she was, about offers of help pouring in. A television reporter named Sarah Chen had tracked them down through the community center. She arrived that afternoon with a camera crew, asking if Margaret would agree to be interviewed. Margaret's first instinct was to say no. She did not want people to see her like this, dirty and poor and living on the street. But Sarah was gentle and respectful, and she made a promise that Margaret could not refuse. "If you talk to me," Sarah said, kneeling down so she was at eye level with Margaret, "I'll make sure people understand that this is not just about one old woman and one little girl. This is about all the elderly people who fall through the cracks, who end up homeless through no fault of their own. I'll tell your story, but I'll also talk about the bigger issue. Would that be okay?" Margaret thought about all the other people she had met on the streets. The Vietnam veteran with mental illness who could not hold down a job. The woman who lost everything in a house fire and had no insurance. The man whose pension had been stolen by a corrupt company. They all had stories. They all deserve to be seen as human beings, not just problems to be ignored. All right, Margaret said finally. I'll talk to you. The interview took place right there on the sidewalk, with Margaret and Lily sitting on their blanket. Sarah asked questions gently, never pushing too hard, always respectful. Margaret found herself telling the story she had kept locked inside for so long. She talked about Robert and his illness, about the medical bills and the predatory loans. She talked about losing her house, her piano, everything she had built in a lifetime of work. She talked about Grace and her addiction, about being left alone with Lily, about choosing the streets over letting her granddaughter go into the system. Through it all, Sarah listened with compassion in her eyes. When Margaret talked about teaching piano for 50 years, about the joy of sharing music with children, Sarah asked her to talk more about that. When Margaret's voice broke talking about her husband, Sarah waited patiently until she could continue. What do you want people to know? Sarah asked near the end of the interview. Margaret looked down at Lily, who was playing quietly with her one-eared rabbit. I want people to know that we're still here. We're still human. Just because we lost our home doesn't mean we lost our worth. And I want them to know that beauty can exist anywhere, even on a sidewalk. Music doesn't need a concert hall.
Love doesn't need a house.
Those things live inside us and nobody can take them away. Sarah wiped her eyes. The cameraman was openly crying. When they finished filming, Sarah gave Margaret her business card. The station has set up a fund, she said. For you and Lily, people have already started donating. We'll make sure the money gets to you safely. Margaret could not believe it. Why would strangers give us money? Because your story touched them, Sarah explained. Because they see themselves or their mothers or grandmothers in you. Because kindness exists in this world, even when it seems like it doesn't. The interview aired that evening on the local news. Linda brought a laptop to the community center so Margaret and Lily could watch it. Margaret saw herself on the screen and barely recognized the woman sitting there. She looked so old, so tired, so worn down by life. But when she talked about music, about teaching, about Lily, her face transformed. There was light in her eyes, dignity in her voice. She looked like a person who mattered, not just a homeless woman to be pitied. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The news station's phone lines lit up with calls. The donation fund that was supposed to help a little grew larger than anyone expected. Within 24 hours, strangers had donated over $50,000. Some donations were $5 from people who did not have much themselves. Others were thousands of dollars from wealthy people moved by Margaret's story. But it was not just money. A local church offered Margaret and Lily a place to stay, a small room they could use while things got sorted out. A lawyer called the news station offering to help for free with any legal issues. A doctor said she would provide medical care. People dropped off clothes, toys for Lily, toiletries, food. The kindness was almost too much to bear. Sarah came back the next day with a crew for a follow-up story. This time, they went to the community center, and Margaret agreed to play the piano again. She was cleaner now, having been able to shower at the church. Lily wore a new dress that someone had donated, her hair brushed and shining. But what mattered most was the music. Margaret sat at that old, out-of-tune piano and played again. This time she chose something lighter, happier. She played Clair de Lune by Debussy, music that sparkled like moonlight on water. Lily sat beside her as before, watching her grandmother's fingers with wonder. The camera captured it all. The beauty of the music, the love between grandmother and granddaughter, the triumph of the human spirit over hardship. When she finished, Lily clapped her little hands together. Grandma, can I try? Of course, sweet girl. Margaret guided Lily's small fingers to the keys, showing her how to play a simple melody. Just 3 notes up and down, but Lily played them with such concentration and joy that everyone watching felt their hearts swell. This was hope. This was the future. This was proof that even in the darkest times, beauty and learning could continue. That video went even more viral than the first. People loved seeing Lily begin to learn, loved watching Margaret teach with such patience and love. Comments flooded in by the thousands. This is what humanity should be about. I'm donating to help them right now. God bless this woman for protecting her granddaughter. Music teachers change lives. This proves it. But with the attention came challenges. Margaret started to feel overwhelmed by all the people who wanted to help, to talk to her, to be part of her story. Reporters called constantly. Strangers showed up at the church looking for her. Some wanted to help genuinely, others just wanted to be close to someone who had become internet famous. Margaret did not want fame. She just wanted stability and safety for Lily. Sarah Chen became a buffer between Margaret and the chaos. She screened calls, managed requests, helped Margaret figure out what help to accept and what to politely decline. The news station had assigned Sarah to follow Margaret's story, and she had become protective of the old woman and her granddaughter. "There are a lot of people who want to help," Sarah explained one afternoon as they sat in the church's small meeting room. "But some help is better than others. We need to think about what will actually improve your life long term, not just make good television." Margaret nodded. She trusted Sarah. The reporter had been nothing but kind and honest since they met. "What do you think I should do?" "First, we need to get you stable housing," Sarah said. "Not just a room at the church, but a real apartment where you and Lily can build a life. Second, we need to work with that lawyer on getting formal custody of Lily. If your daughter is in trouble, we need to make sure Lily is legally protected." "Grace," Margaret said softly. "Her name is Grace. She's sick, not bad." "Addiction is a sickness." "I know," Sarah said gently. "And we're trying to find her too. She should know what's happening, that you and Lily are getting help." Over the next few days, things began to fall into place. The donation fund had grown to over $100,000, carefully managed by the news station's legal team to make sure it went directly to Margaret's needs. A property manager offered a small apartment at a reduced rent. Social services, instead of threatening to take Lily away, worked with Margaret to create a care plan that would keep them together. And then came the most surprising development of all. A music teacher named David Park saw the video and recognized Margaret. He had been one of her students 40 years ago, a shy 8-year-old boy whose parents had forced him to take piano lessons. Margaret had been patient with him, kind, encouraging. She had helped him fall in love with music. He had gone on to become a professional musician, teaching at a prestigious music school in the city. David could not believe that his beloved teacher was homeless. He called the news station immediately, asking to be put in touch with Margaret. When Sarah arranged for them to meet, David came to the church with tears already streaming down his face. "Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice breaking. "Do you remember me?" "David Park? I took lessons from you in the 1980s. Margaret looked at him closely. She had taught so many students over the years, hundreds of them. But yes, she remembered. A quiet boy with small hands and a gentle way of playing. "David," she said slowly, "you played Beethoven at your final recital. Fürelise. You played it beautifully." David started crying harder. "You remember? After all these years, you remember." "I remember all my students," Margaret said. "How could I forget the children who brought music into my life?" David sat down and told Margaret about his career, his success, how she had changed his life by teaching him to love music. Then he made a proposal that took Margaret's breath away. "I've contacted other former students," he said. "People you taught over the years. We're all successful now, all doing well, and we all remember you. We want to help, Mrs. Chen. Not because you're a viral video, but because you're our teacher. You gave us music. Let us give back to you." Within a week, David had organized a network of Margaret's former students. There were musicians, teachers, doctors, lawyers, business owners. All of them had sat on the bench beside Margaret at some point, learning scales and chords and classical pieces. All of them remembered her kindness, her patience, the gift she had given them. They created a more permanent support system for Margaret and Lily. They contributed to a trust fund for Lily's education. They offered services, connections, help of every kind. Some of them cried when they saw their old teacher for the first time in decades, shocked by what life had done to her, but amazed by her dignity and strength. Margaret was overwhelmed by it all. She sat in her small room at the church one evening, Lily asleep beside her, and tried to process everything that had happened. 1 week ago, she had been invisible, just another homeless person that people walked past without seeing. Now she was surrounded by help, by kindness, by people who wanted to make her life better. It was too much. It was wonderful and terrifying and confusing all at once. She cried that night, releasing years of pain and fear and exhaustion, but they were also tears of hope, of gratitude, of cautious joy. Sarah came by the next day to film another update for the news. "How are you feeling about all of this?" she asked as the camera rolled. Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I feel grateful," she said finally. "Grateful and humbled and a little scared. For 3 years I was invisible. Now everyone can see me. It's a strange feeling, but mostly I feel hope. For the first time in so long, I believe that Lily and I might actually be okay, that we might have a future. And that is everything." The interview ended, but the story was far from over. Margaret's journey from homelessness to stability had just begun. The viral videos had opened doors, but she would still have to walk through them, one step at a time. There would be challenges ahead, setbacks, difficult decisions, but she would not face them alone anymore. The music she had shared with the world had brought the world back to her, and for that she would be forever grateful. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms and a tiny bathroom, but to Margaret it felt like a palace. It was on the 3rd floor of an old building, with windows that looked out over a small park. The property manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, had offered it at a rent Margaret could actually afford with the donation fund. More importantly, it was clean, safe, and warm. Margaret stood in the middle of the empty living room, holding Lily's hand, and felt tears run down her face. "We have a home, sweet girl," she whispered. "A real home." Lily looked around with wide eyes. She was too young to remember living anywhere but the streets. "Can we stay here forever?" she asked. "For as long as we need to," Margaret promised. David Park and several other former students helped them move in. There was not much to move, just the 3 bags they had been carrying for months. But the students had brought donations, things that Margaret and Lily would need. There were beds with real mattresses and clean sheets. There was a small table with chairs. There were pots and pans for the kitchen, dishes, cups, silverware. Someone brought towels and soap and shampoo that smelled like flowers. Someone else brought groceries and filled the tiny refrigerator. But the most important thing, the gift that made Margaret break down completely, came in the afternoon. David and 3 other men carried it up the 3 flights of stairs, grunting with effort. It was a piano. Not a baby grand like the one Margaret had lost, but a beautiful upright piano in dark cherry wood. It was not new, but it had been recently tuned and was in perfect condition. "Every music teacher needs a piano," David said, smiling through his own tears. "Especially one as talented as you." They placed it against the wall in the living room. Margaret ran her fingers over the smooth wood, then sat down and played a few notes. The sound was clear and true, each note perfect. She played a scale, then a chord progression, then launched into a piece by Mozart. Her fingers danced across the keys, and the small apartment filled with music for the first time. Lily climbed up onto the bench beside her grandmother, just like she had at the community center. "Can I learn now?" she asked eagerly. "Yes," Margaret said, kissing the top of Lily's head. "Now we can have proper lessons. We'll start tomorrow." That night, Margaret tucked Lily into a real bed for the first time in the child's recent memory. She pulled the clean sheets up to Lily's chin and smoothed back her hair. "Are you happy, sweet girl?" "Yes, Grandma." "Can we really stay here?" "Yes, we can. This is our home now. Will Mama come find us here?" Margaret's heart clenched. Grace. They had not heard from her in over 6 months. Margaret did not even know if her daughter was alive. "I hope so," she said honestly. "I hope she's getting help and that someday she'll come back to us healthy and strong." But even as she said it, Margaret felt guilt gnaw at her. She had been so focused on surviving, on keeping Lily safe, that she had not tried very hard to find Grace. What kind of mother was she? Grace was sick, suffering from addiction, and Margaret had let her disappear. Sarah Chen must have been thinking the same thing. She came by the apartment the next day with news. "We've been looking for your daughter," she said gently. "The news station hired a private investigator. We found her, Margaret. She's in a rehabilitation facility about 2 hours from here." Margaret's hands began to shake. "Is she okay? Is she alive?" "She's alive. She checked herself in about 4 months ago. She's been clean for 120 days. Sarah pulled out a piece of paper with an address. "The facility director says she's doing well. They've been working on getting her healthy, both physically and mentally." Grace didn't know about the video, about what was happening with you and Lily. When we contacted the facility, they told her. "She wants to see you." Margaret did not know how to feel. Relief that Grace was alive. Anger that she had abandoned them. Hope that maybe, possibly, her daughter could recover. Fear that it was too late, that too much damage had been done. "When?" she asked. "Whenever you're ready." "The facility welcomes family visits. They think it would be good for Grace's recovery to see that you and Lily are safe." Margaret decided to go that weekend. David offered to drive her. and to watch Lily during the visit. Margaret was grateful. She did not know if she wanted Lily to see Grace yet, not until she knew what condition her daughter was in. The drive took 2.5 hours through countryside that Margaret barely saw. Her mind was racing, practicing what she would say, trying to prepare for every possible scenario. David tried to make conversation but eventually gave up, letting Margaret sit with her thoughts. The rehabilitation facility was a low, sprawling building surrounded by gardens. It looked more like a retreat than a hospital. A counselor met them at the entrance, a young woman with a calm, professional demeanor. "Mrs. Chen, I'm glad you could come. I'm Rachel, Grace's primary counselor. Before you see her, I want to prepare you a little bit." They sat in a small office. Rachel explained that Grace had come to them in terrible shape, malnourished and sick from years of drug use. But she had worked hard in treatment, facing the demons that had led to her addiction. "She carries a lot of guilt," Rachel explained, "about leaving you and Lily, about the choices she made. She's terrified that you won't forgive her." "She's my daughter," Margaret said simply. "Of course I forgive her. That will mean a lot to her. But Mrs. Chen, I need you to understand that recovery is a long process. Grace is doing well now, but she has months of work ahead of her. She won't be ready to leave here for a while, and when she does leave, she'll need ongoing support and therapy. There are no guarantees." "I understand," Margaret said. She did understand, probably better than Rachel thought. She had watched Grace struggle with addiction for years. She had seen her daughter make promises and break them, get clean and relapse. Hope was dangerous when it came to addiction. But it was also necessary. Grace was waiting in a sunlit common room sitting by a window. When Margaret walked in, her daughter stood up slowly. Margaret barely recognized her. Grace had always been thin, but now she looked healthier, with some color in her face. Her hair was clean and pulled back. She was wearing simple clothes, jeans, and a sweater. She looked younger somehow, more like the girl she had been before drugs stole her life. "Mom," Grace said, her voice breaking. "Mom, I'm so sorry." Margaret crossed the room and pulled her daughter into her arms. Grace broke down completely, sobbing against her mother's shoulder. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," she kept saying over and over. "Shh," Margaret soothed, holding her tight. "You're here now. You're getting help. That's what matters." They sat down together and Grace could not stop crying. "I saw the video," she finally managed to say. "I saw you and Lily on that sidewalk, homeless because of me. Mom, what did I do to you? What kind of monster abandons her mother and her child?" "You're not a monster," Margaret said firmly. "You're sick. Addiction is a sickness, Grace. It's not who you are." "I don't deserve you," Grace whispered. "I don't deserve either of you. You should hate me." "I could never hate you. You're my daughter. I love you. I have always loved you, even when you made it very hard." They talked for 2 hours. Grace asked about Lily and Margaret told her everything. How brave Lily had been, how patient and understanding, how she had never complained even when they were cold and hungry. Grace cried harder hearing about what her daughter had endured because of her choices. Margaret told Grace about the apartment, the piano, the help from former students. She explained that they were safe now, stable, no longer on the streets. "Lily is doing well," she assured her daughter. "She asks about you sometimes. She wants to know when her mama is coming home." "Can I see her?" Grace asked hesitantly. "Would that be okay? Or is it too soon?" Margaret thought about it. Rachel had said that family connections could help in recovery. But she also worried about Lily getting her hopes up if Grace relapsed. "Let's wait a little bit," she said gently. "Let's make sure you're strong enough first. I don't want her to see you until you're really ready to be her mother again." Grace nodded, understanding but clearly disappointed. "That's fair. That's more than fair. I need to prove myself first. I need to show that I can stay clean, that I can be trusted." "How are you feeling?" Margaret asked. "Really feeling?" "Scared," Grace admitted. "Every day I wake up scared. Scared I'll relapse, scared I'll lose you both forever, scared that I've damaged Lily in ways that can't be fixed. But I'm also hopeful for the first time in years. The counselors here are helping me understand why I started using in the first place, helping me develop tools to cope without drugs. I'm learning, Mom. Finally learning how to live." Margaret reached over and took her daughter's hand. It was thin but steady, no longer shaking from withdrawal. "You can do this, Grace. I believe in you. Even after everything I've done, even after everything, you're my daughter. That never changes. Before Margaret left, Grace gave her a letter she had written for Lily. "I'm not ready to see her yet," she explained, "but I want her to know I'm thinking about her, that I love her. Will you read it to her?" Margaret took the letter carefully. "I will." Driving back with David, Margaret felt emotionally exhausted. Seeing Grace had brought up so many complicated feelings, but overall she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Real, solid hope that maybe her family could heal, that maybe Grace could recover and be a mother to Lily again. That night, after Lily was in bed, Margaret opened Grace's letter. She read it first to make sure it was appropriate. It was simple and heartfelt. Grace apologized to her daughter for leaving, told her she was getting help to be healthy again, and promised to be a better mama. She told Lily how much she loved her and how brave she was. Margaret folded the letter carefully, planning to read it to Lily in the morning. But when morning came and Margaret read the letter aloud, Lily's reaction surprised her. The little girl listened carefully, then asked, "Is Mama coming back soon?" "Not yet, sweet girl. She needs to stay where she is and get better. But someday, yes." "Okay," Lily said simply, then went back to playing with her toys. She seemed to accept this easily, without the emotional weight that Margaret carried. Children were resilient in ways adults could never be. Over the next few weeks, Margaret and Lily settled into a routine. They woke up in their apartment in real beds. They ate breakfast at their little table. Then Margaret would teach Lily piano for an hour each morning, starting with the absolute basics. Middle C, simple scales, hand positions. Lily absorbed everything like a sponge, eager to learn. In the afternoons, a social worker would come to check on them, making sure Lily was being properly cared for. Margaret had been worried about these visits at first, scared they would take Lily away. But the social worker, a kind woman named Ms. Patterson, was supportive. She helped Margaret apply for benefits, navigate the legal system for getting formal custody, and access resources for Lily's education. David Park and the other former students visited regularly, bringing groceries, offering help, sometimes just sitting and talking. They had started a proper fund for Margaret, not just for immediate needs but for long-term stability. They talked about her teaching again, maybe starting with a few students, working up to a full schedule if she felt able. "You gave us music," David said one afternoon as he and Margaret sat at the piano together. "Let us help you share it with a new generation." Sarah Chen came by weekly to film updates for the news. The public was still interested in Margaret's story, still wanting to know how she and Lily were doing. The donations continued to come in, not as much as at first, but steady. People sent toys for Lily, books, clothes. One woman knitted them blankets. A local bakery delivered fresh bread every week. Margaret was learning to accept help, learning that needing others was not weakness but part of being human. She had spent so long trying to be strong, to manage everything alone. Now she was discovering that there was strength in community, in connection, in letting people care. One evening, as Margaret was teaching Lily a simple melody, there was a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, the property manager, with a large package. "This just arrived for you," she said, smiling mysteriously. Margaret opened the package carefully. Inside was a beautiful music stand, the kind that professional musicians used. There was also a box of sheet music, carefully selected pieces for beginners and intermediate students. And there was a letter. It was from the local music conservatory. They had seen the videos, heard about Margaret's 50 years of teaching. They were offering her a position as a part-time instructor, teaching piano to children from low-income families who could not afford regular lessons. The pay was modest but steady. More importantly, it was recognition of her skill, her experience, her value as a teacher. Margaret read the letter 3 times, unable to believe it. A real job. Not just survival but purpose. Not just getting by but contributing. Using her gifts, making a difference again. She looked over at Lily, who was trying to play the melody they had been practicing. The child's small fingers moved carefully across the keys, concentrating hard. She made a mistake and giggled, then tried again. Watching her, Margaret felt her heart swell with love and gratitude. 3 months ago, they had been sleeping on concrete. Now they had a home, stability, hope, and a future. Grace was in recovery, working hard to get better. Margaret had a job offer, doing what she loved. And Lily was learning music, just as Margaret had promised. It was not perfect. There were still challenges ahead. Grace might relapse. Money was still tight. Margaret's health was fragile, her body worn out from years of hardship. But they were no longer alone. They were no longer invisible. They mattered to people, to the community, to the strangers who had been moved by their story. That night, Margaret sat at the piano after Lily was asleep. She played quietly, not wanting to wake her granddaughter. She played Chopin, the same piece that had started everything, but this time there was no sadness in her playing. There was gratitude, joy, hope, and love. The music filled the small apartment, spilling out through the windows into the night. A prayer of thanksgiving for second chances, and the kindness of strangers who had become friends. 6 months passed like a dream that Margaret was afraid to wake up from. Every morning she opened her eyes in the small apartment, half expecting to find herself back on the cold concrete. But the apartment was always there, warm and safe, with Lily sleeping peacefully in the next room. Reality had become better than any dream. The music conservatory job had turned out to be exactly what Margaret needed. She taught 3 days a week, working with children who reminded her why she had fallen in love with teaching in the first place. Some came from families struggling to make ends meet. Others had parents who worked 3 jobs and could not afford expensive private lessons. All of them were hungry to learn, eager to discover the magic of music. Margaret was patient with them, just as she had been with hundreds of students before. She remembered each child's name, their struggles, their victories. When little Marcus finally played his first complete scale without mistakes, she celebrated as if he had performed at Carnegie Hall. When shy Elena played her first recital piece in front of the other students, Margaret had tears in her eyes. The children loved her. They called her Mrs. Chen, or more often, Grandma Margaret. Their parents trusted her completely. Word spread about the elderly piano teacher at the conservatory, the one who had been homeless, the one who had touched millions of hearts with her story. Families requested her specifically, wanting their children to learn from someone who understood struggle, who knew that music could survive anything. Lily was thriving. At 5 years old now, she had grown taller, healthier, more confident. Her vocabulary had expanded dramatically from the days when Margaret taught her using bottle caps and sticks in the dirt. She attended kindergarten at the local public school, making friends and bringing home artwork that Margaret hung proudly on the refrigerator. But music remained Lily's greatest joy. Every afternoon when she came home from school, she would go straight to the piano. Margaret would give her a proper lesson, building on what they had worked on the day before. Lily learned quickly, her small fingers growing stronger and more coordinated. She could read music now, simple pieces that made her laugh with delight when she played them correctly. Margaret had started entering Lily in small recitals at the conservatory. The first time Lily performed in front of an audience, playing a simple arrangement of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Margaret watched from the side of the stage with her heart in her throat. Lily was nervous, her hands shaking a little as they hovered over the keys. But then she began to play and the nervousness disappeared. She became absorbed in the music, just as Margaret always did. When she finished and the audience applauded, Lily's face lit up with pure joy. "Did I do good, Grandma?" she asked, running off the stage into Margaret's arms. "You did perfectly, sweet girl. I'm so proud of you." Grace's recovery was progressing, though not without setbacks. She had completed the initial rehabilitation program and moved into a halfway house where she could continue therapy while slowly reintegrating into society. She had a job now, working at a grocery store, simple work but honest work. She attended Narcotics Anonymous meetings every day and had a sponsor she called when cravings hit. Margaret visited her every 2 weeks, and slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild their relationship. Grace asked about everything, wanting to know every detail of Lily's life. Margaret would bring photos, drawings that Lily had made, report cards from school. Grace would study them like precious treasures, crying sometimes at all she had missed. After 3 months of Grace being stable in the halfway house, the counselors agreed that it was time for her to see Lily. The first visit was supervised, taking place at the facility with Rachel present. Margaret brought Lily, who was nervous and excited at the same time. "Do you remember what Mama looks like?" Margaret asked in the car. Lily shook her head. "Not really. Will she remember me?" "She never forgot you, sweet girl. Not for one single day." When Lily walked into the visiting room and saw Grace, she stopped, uncertain. Grace was sitting in a chair, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked terrified. "Hi, baby," she said softly. Lily looked up at Margaret, seeking reassurance. Margaret nodded encouragingly. Slowly, Lily walked over to her mother. Grace knelt down so they were at eye level. "You've gotten so big," she whispered. "You're so beautiful. Grandma says you were sick, but you're getting better," Lily said seriously. "That's right. I was very sick, and I did some bad things because I was sick. But I'm getting better now. I'm going to keep getting better so I can be a good mama to you." "Okay," Lily said simply. Then, with the easy forgiveness of a child, she gave her mother a hug. Grace held her daughter and sobbed, overwhelmed with relief and love and regret. Margaret watched them together and felt her own tears fall. This was what she had hoped for, prayed for during all those cold nights on the street. Her family, healing. Not fixed, not perfect, but healing. The visits continued, becoming more frequent as Grace proved her stability. After another 3 months, she was allowed to leave the halfway house, though she had to continue regular therapy and drug testing. She moved into a small studio apartment, clean and simple, furnished with donations and items from thrift stores. It was not much, but it was hers, earned through hard work and dedication to recovery. Grace started having supervised visits with Lily at Margaret's apartment. She would come over on Saturday afternoons and they would do simple things together. Grace would color with Lily, read her stories, play simple games. Margaret stayed close by, ready to step in if needed, but giving them space to reconnect. One Saturday, Grace asked if she could hear Lily play piano. Lily eagerly climbed onto the bench and played the piece she had been practicing, a simple arrangement of Für Elise. Grace watched with wonder, seeing in her daughter a talent and discipline that came from Margaret's patient teaching. "She's amazing," Grace said to her mother after Lily finished. "You've done such a good job with her, Mom. I can never thank you enough." "You don't need to thank me," Margaret said. "She's my granddaughter. I love her, I know, but you sacrificed everything for her. You lived on the streets to keep her safe. That's more than I ever did. You're doing it now," Margaret pointed out. "You're fighting every day to get better, to be the mother she needs. That takes courage, Grace." Grace wiped her eyes. "I have a long way to go, but I'm not giving up. I won't give up." Meanwhile, the community center where Margaret had first played the piano had not forgotten about her. Linda approached Margaret with an idea. "What would you think about teaching here?" she asked. "Free lessons for kids in the neighborhood who can't afford to go to the conservatory. We could make it a weekly program. Margaret's music circle or something like that." Margaret loved the idea. Teaching at the conservatory was wonderful, but this would reach children who might never otherwise have access to music education. She agreed immediately, and they started the program on Wednesday afternoons. The first week, 5 children showed up. By the third week, there were 15. They ranged in age from 6 to 12, all eager to learn. Margaret taught them in a circle around the old upright piano, the same piano where she had played that rainy day 6 months ago. She taught them about notes and rhythm, about how music was a language anyone could learn to speak. She also taught them that making mistakes was okay, that learning was a process, that music was not about being perfect but about expressing yourself. Some of the children had difficult home lives, poverty or family problems that weighed on their young shoulders. Music became a refuge for them, a place where they could forget their troubles and just create beauty. David Park and other former students would sometimes visit Margaret's music circle, offering guest lessons or just watching their old teacher work her magic with a new generation. They saw in her teaching the same patience and passion that had changed their own lives decades ago. Time and hardship had not dimmed Margaret's gift, only refined it. Sarah Chen had continued following Margaret's story, doing occasional updates for the news. But the relationship had evolved beyond reporter and subject. They had become genuine friends. Sarah would stop by the apartment just to chat, bringing coffee and pastries, listening as Margaret talked about her students or worried about Grace or celebrated Lily's latest accomplishment. For the 1-year anniversary of the video going viral, Sarah proposed doing a special segment. "I want to show people where you are now," she explained. Not for drama or ratings, but to show that change is possible, that communities coming together can truly transform lives. Margaret agreed, and they filmed the segment over several days. Sarah came to the conservatory and filmed Margaret teaching. She went to the community center and captured Margaret's music circle in action. She interviewed David Park and other former students about their teacher's impact. She talked to Linda at the community center, to Mrs. Rodriguez, the property manager, to Ms. Patterson, the social worker. Most importantly, she interviewed Margaret, asking her to reflect on the past year. They sat in Margaret's apartment, the piano visible in the background, Lily playing quietly nearby. "A year ago you were homeless," Sarah said. "Now you're here. How does it feel?" Margaret thought carefully before answering, as she always did. Margaret looked over at Lily, who was arranging her stuffed animals in a row, singing softly to them. "I want people to see the homeless differently," she said. "We're not statistics or problems. We're people with histories, with talents, with worth. We're someone's mother or father or grandmother. We had lives before we ended up on the streets, and we can have lives after. But we need help. We can't do it alone." The special segment aired on the anniversary of the original video. It was watched by millions of people, many of whom had followed Margaret's journey from the beginning. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People commented about how inspiring her story was, how it gave them hope, how it reminded them to be kind to everyone they met. But for Margaret, the real celebration happened that weekend. David Park had organized a reunion of sorts, inviting all of Margaret's former students who could attend. They rented a small concert hall and over 50 people showed up, people Margaret had taught over 5 decades of lessons. They ranged in age from teenagers to people in their 60s. Some had become professional musicians. Others had pursued different careers but still played piano as a hobby. Some barely remembered how to play, but had never forgotten their teacher. They all came to honor the woman who had given them the gift of music. One by one, they performed. Simple pieces, complex concertos, jazz arrangements, classical masterworks. Each performance was dedicated to Margaret. Each one a thank you for the patience, the encouragement, the love she had shown them when they were learning. Margaret sat in the front row with Lily beside her and Grace on her other side. Grace had been given permission to attend, and she held her mother's hand, crying at the beauty of what Margaret had created through her teaching. At the end of the concert, David asked Margaret to play. She was hesitant at first, feeling that this day should be about her students, not her. But they insisted, calling for her from the audience, and finally she agreed. She walked up to the beautiful grand piano on stage, Lily following close behind as always. They sat on the bench together, grandmother and granddaughter, just as they had sat on that dusty bench at the community center a year ago. Margaret put her hands on the keys and Lily put her small hands next to her grandmother's. "What should we play?" Margaret whispered. "Something happy," Lily whispered back. "Something that tells people everything is okay now." Margaret smiled. She began to play a simple melody, one she had written herself many years ago but never shared publicly. It was a piece about hope, about light returning after darkness, about joy found in unexpected places. Lily joined in, playing a simple harmony that Margaret had taught her just for this moment. The music filled the concert hall, simple but beautiful, imperfect but heartfelt. It spoke of a journey from despair to hope, from invisibility to being seen, from brokenness to healing. Everyone in the audience understood what the music was saying. Many were crying, moved by the pure emotion flowing from the piano. When they finished, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the applause started, growing louder and louder until it was thunderous. People stood, clapping and cheering, not just for the music but for everything it represented. The triumph of the human spirit, the power of community, the truth that it is never too late for a new beginning. Margaret stood and took Lily's hand, and they bowed together, looking out at the audience, at all these people whose lives she had touched, at Grace smiling through her tears, at David and the other students who had saved her. Margaret felt something she had not felt in many years. She felt complete. Her life was not perfect. There were still challenges ahead. Grace's recovery was an ongoing process with no guarantees. Money was still tight, requiring careful budgeting. Margaret's health was fragile, her body bearing the scars of 3 years on the streets. But she had a home. She had her granddaughter. She had her daughter back, changed and healing. She had her music. She had purpose. She had community. Later that night, after the concert, after the celebration dinner, after tucking an exhausted Lily into bed, Margaret sat at her piano in the quiet apartment. She did not play. She just sat there, her hands resting on the keys, thinking about the journey that had brought her here, from a comfortable life to homelessness, from invisibility to viral fame, from despair to hope. Every step had been painful, but every step had also been necessary. She had learned things about herself, about humanity, about the resilience of the human spirit that she never would have learned otherwise. She thought about all the people still living on the streets, still invisible, still suffering. Her story had a happy ending, but so many others did not. That thought weighed on her heart. She wanted to do more, to help others the way she had been helped. The community center program was a start, but it was not enough. An idea began to form in her mind. She would talk to David, to Sarah, to the others who had helped her. Maybe they could start a fund, not just for her, but for other elderly homeless people. Maybe they could create more programs, more opportunities, more ways to help people get back on their feet. She had been given so much. It was time to give back. Margaret looked at the clock. It was late, almost midnight. She should go to bed. Tomorrow would be busy with teaching and lessons and all the beautiful, normal activities that filled her days now. But she sat at the piano for just a moment longer, savoring the peace, the warmth, the safety. She thought about Robert and wished he could see where she was now, how she had survived, how she had protected their granddaughter. She thought about her younger self, the woman who had taught piano for 50 years, never imagining where life would lead. She thought about the Margaret who had slept on concrete 6 months ago, cold and afraid but refusing to give up. All of those Margarets were part of who she was now. The losses, the pain, the struggles had not destroyed her. They had refined her, made her stronger, taught her what truly mattered, not possessions or comfort or security. What mattered was love, music, community, and the courage to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. Margaret placed her fingers on the keys and played one more time before bed. Just a few notes, soft and gentle, a lullaby for herself and for Lily sleeping in the next room. A song of gratitude, of peace, of hope for the future. Tomorrow would come with its challenges and joys, its struggles and victories. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. An 87-year-old woman and her 5-year-old granddaughter, safe and warm in their little apartment, with a piano that sang when touched, with a community that cared, with a future that held infinite possibilities. It was more than enough. It was everything. And somewhere out in the city, on streets and sidewalks, other people slept rough, invisible, and forgotten. But because of Margaret's story, a few more people noticed them now. A few more people stopped to help. A few more hearts had been opened to compassion. The ripple effects of kindness spread far beyond what anyone could measure. Margaret finished playing and closed the piano lid gently. She stood, her old bones creaking, and walked to her bedroom. She checked on Lily one more time, pulling the blanket up around the sleeping child's shoulders. "Sweet dreams, my love," she whispered. Then she climbed into her own bed, in her own room, in her own home. As she closed her eyes, Margaret smiled. Tomorrow she would teach music. Tomorrow she would love her granddaughter. Tomorrow she would continue helping her daughter heal. Tomorrow she would work to help others still struggling. Tomorrow would be beautiful. But so was today. So was this moment. Life had taught her to cherish each day, each hour, each breath. Nothing was guaranteed, but nothing was impossible either. That was the greatest lesson of all. Margaret fell asleep peacefully, dreaming of music and children and second chances and the unbreakable bond between a grandmother and her granddaughter. Outside, the city lights twinkled in the darkness. Inside, all was warm and safe and filled with hope. And somewhere in the universe, perhaps Robert was smiling, proud of his beloved wife for surviving the unsurvivable and teaching the world that kindness, music, and love can indeed conquer all.